and we've been doing a series of talks on a Sunday morning, looking at what I would say is the shadow of the cross throughout all the Old Testament, and trying to see in the Old Testament pictures of Jesus, trying to see where Jesus is mentioned, but more than that, where there are little pictures that point us to God's plan of salvation. And I've called this series of talks God's Cunning Plan, for those that were Blackadder followers, which I was, and there was always a cunning plan in Blackadder to resolve whatever issues they were dealing with. And to understand that it was always God's plan that Jesus would come and die on the cross and be raised from the dead for us. And sometimes we think of that as almost like an afterthought. Sometimes, how could all these stories throughout this incredible book point to Jesus? It was written thousands of years before Jesus came, but somehow, how could all this point to Jesus? And it's so important that we get that whole concept of what God is saying. So we've been looking at all sorts of things. We haven't got very far through the book of Genesis at the moment, but we're getting there. We looked at Adam and Eve right at the very beginning, how God, right at the very beginning in the Garden of Eden, takes an animal and sacrifices it in order to cover the shame and the guilt of Adam and Eve when they'd sinned. That first picture of a sacrifice. They're trying to cover themselves in fig leaves, trying to hide it from God, but God's there, and God doesn't destroy them, doesn't really shout at them, but he comes alongside them and starts to help them and points them to the salvation that one day was going to come in the very form of Jesus, when Jesus would be sacrificed for their sin and my sin and the sin that I have not yet even committed. And he takes an animal and he kills it and he clothes them with the garments made out of the skin. You can't do that without sacrifice. You can't do that without blood being shed. And I've often wondered, what animal was it? I love it. I would love it if it was a lamb or a sheep. The Bible doesn't say. We've got to sort of work that one out for ourselves. But wouldn't that be absolutely amazing? The Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. And right the way through, we start to see these little pictures of the cross of Jesus appearing in the stories. Last week we started, and we're going to talk a little bit about this today. We started with the story of Abraham and how God comes to Abraham and tells him that he's going to be the forerunner of Jesus, be the forerunner of a great nation. This man who's married to Sarah and who is barren and can't have any children. And God comes and tells him, you're going to have children as numerous as the stars in the sky. And Abraham starts this journey which takes him years and years and years and years to go through, as he has to learn to trust God for God's promises to be unfolded in his life. God had promises for him, and time again, like me, I was saying this last week, and probably many like you, we want to do it our way. We want to do it our way and not God's way. I mean, God gives us a promise, we're waiting on it, and if it doesn't happen, then we think we've got it wrong, or we start to try and make it happen for ourselves. Kick open some doors that really should never have been opened in the first place, because we want it to happen in our way, in the way that we want it to. And God says, will you learn? Will you stop it, Derrick? Will you just stop doing that and wait? Learn to trust me. Abraham, it took him years. Everywhere he went, He tried to do it his way. God took him to the promised land we saw last week. And the first thing that happened, there is a famine. So Abraham doesn't stay. He goes off to Egypt where there's food. I wonder what would have happened if he'd have stayed and learnt to trust God where he was. But he had to go where he thought it would be better for him. Abraham decides, well, he's waited too long for this promise of this son that was going to come. And him and Sarah come up with this plan of their own, another cunning plan. It doesn't work very well. Where Abraham sleeps with Sarah's handmaiden, and she gets pregnant, and there's a son, Ishmael. And it's not God's plan. God's plan was always going to be Isaac. But Abraham had to do it his way. And time again, God has to tell Abraham, stop it. Don't keep doing this, because I've got a plan for you. I've got a plan for your life, and if you'll only follow my plan, not your plan, we will see you grow and develop into this great, wonderful nation. Just been singing the song. You are Lord in this place. We worship you. But the key to that song is Lord. Putting him first, not me. And that's the hardest thing, I think, for most Christians to come to, that sense where we really get to a place where we learn to trust and obey Jesus. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus, but to trust and obey. Not to do it our way, but to do it God's way. And throughout Abraham's life, he is learned or taught time and time again. And he doesn't twig. The penny doesn't drop for years in Abraham's life, until eventually it does. Abraham finally has this promised son, Isaac. Elderly man, even when all this happens and God comes and says, Sarah's going to give birth to a child in her old age, and he goes, well, are you joking? No, he's still not quite learned. But eventually we come to this story, and I just want to unpick this story a little bit for us today as we do, because I want us to realize we've got to come to the place where we truly and utterly and completely trust Jesus with our now, and trust Jesus with our future, and dare I say also to trust him with our past. Trust him that he really has dealt with the sins of our past and forgiven us of everything. To totally and utterly trust him. And when we do, that's when we start to see God move. We start to see God move in our lives. So if you got your Bibles, we're just going to read a little bit of this story. We're going to look at Genesis chapter 22. Part of this amazing story. And I hope today that you're going to start to see something in this. You may already know these things. But then again, I hope you might spot things that you've not ever seen before in this text. Genesis chapter 22 starts like this. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. Well, that's a great start, isn't it? Who wants to be tested? Okay, no, I don't suppose we do really. But I'll tell you what, it happens to every single one of us. Yeah. God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham, here I am, he replied. Love that. God is still speaking to him and he's hearing. Abraham has heard God speak multiple times in the past and seen God do some amazing things. And now he's starting to realize, yes, I can trust this God of mine with my future. Look what he's done throughout my past. Every time I've messed up, he's forgiven me. Every time I've messed up, he's taken me on this journey, he's forgiven me. And we've come to this place now where I have my chosen son, the one who I love. Here I am, he replied. Then God said, take your son, your only son Isaac, who you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and saddled his donkey. he took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey, while I and the boy go over there. We will worship and then we will come back to you." Abraham took the wood for the burnt offerings and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the 2 of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, "Father?" "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "The fire and the wood are here," Isaac said, "but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the 2 of them went on together. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and he took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord cried out from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. "Do not lay a hand on the boy. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." Abraham looked up, and there in the thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the place, "The Lord will provide." And to this day it's said, "On this mountain, the Lord, it will be provided." What a fabulous story. I don't know if I could do that. Have I got to that place in my life where I totally and utterly trust Jesus with everything that I have, everything that I will have, every promise that he's ever given to me? I hope we learn to do that. I love the story at the beginning, the really great story, thank you. The picture of a donkey. I'm going to have to watch that film, I think. That'll be good. Or maybe get it for the grandkids. The grandkids are going to love it. And I know Anne will sit there and enjoy it as well. And if I sit with a book, I can pretend I'm not watching it and enjoy it anyway. That's good. I'm a man. I'm not supposed to be sitting there. Yeah, that's good. Otherwise, I'll be sitting there with tears rolling down my face. Oh, it's so fun. Yeah, I don't want to do that. So, this donkey finally came to realize what God was calling him to do. And it wasn't to be part of the royal procession, it was to be at the disposal of Jesus. Great story. But that's what Abraham and Isaac had to do. They had to learn to utterly and trust God with everything that's going on. So here we've got this story, and it's thousands of years before Jesus. And you can just read it and it goes on, it's great. But if you look into it in a bit of detail, it is full of pictures of Jesus. It could have been written about Jesus' life. It could have been written about him and his death. It could all be about Jesus. And these stories are given to us so that we can realize that the story of Jesus is true. It was prophesied and talked about thousands of years earlier. So when it happens, it isn't just a mistake or a coincidence. It really is what God was planning to do all along. And if we can trust that that's what God did then, we can trust God with what he's going to do with the rest of our lives. Take your son, your only son. Verse 2. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son, that whoever believed in him should not perish but have everlasting life. His only son. Actually, he wasn't, if you think about it. We had Ishmael in the storyline, but he's already gone. He's gone with Hagar, and they've gone off and been to do what they're going to do. They're no longer part of the story at this point. And remember, Isaac was always the son of the promise. So when God says, take your son, your only son, he's meaning Isaac. I promised you this son that was going to come to you in your old age, that was going to be the father of all the nations. Take him, your son, your only son. So off he goes, and they go off towards the mountain to do a burnt offering on Mount Moriah. Early in the next morning, he got up and saddled the donkey. He took with him 2 servants, and when he had cut enough wood, he set out to the place that God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. The 3rd day. Wow. The 3rd day? Jesus rose again on the 3rd day. The 3rd day is a really special day for Jews, the Hebrews. It's the only day, if you look in the Genesis story, where God says it is good twice. On the 3rd day, God says it is good, and it says it is good again twice. So the 3rd day is always seen as an incredibly special and extra blessed day because of that. And often Jews get married on the 3rd day of the week, because it's seen to be such a special day. And of course, that's the day when we celebrate Jesus' resurrection. When they get to the place, what do? He takes the word and he binds it to his son Isaac. Jesus carries the cross on his own back up the hill to his own place of execution. And here we have Isaac carrying the means of execution, the wood himself. Verse 6. Isaac's a young man. Abraham is an old man. And if he'd have wanted to, he could have thrown off the bounds and the bonds. He could have overpowered his dad and said, no, I'm not going to do it. But Isaac was obedient. Isaac just trusted his father with what was going on. For the glory set before him, Jesus endured the cross. Amen. Hebrews 12 verse 2. Isaac was obedient. Jesus was obedient. Isaac is in the prime of life, just a young teenager, the very prime of life when he goes up onto the mountain with his dad. And Jesus at age 33, prime of life. And when we get to the story of the Passover later on, and we look at the Passover and how that also reflects these shadows of the cross, we will see that they took a lamb which was in its prime of life, the sacrificed lamb. And here we have the sacrifice of Isaac, in its prime of life, without sin, going before God as a sacrifice. They get to the place, and what does Isaac say? He says, Dad, yeah, I see we've got the fire, and we see we've got the wood, but where's the lamb? Interesting, the lamb again in this picture. It wasn't where's the animal to be sacrificed, but where's the lamb? Again, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. And his answer is, God will provide. He's let, you see. He doesn't know what's going to happen. I'm sure he doesn't know what's going to happen in this story. Does he think he will have to plunge the knife into his son and kill him? And if that's going to happen, and he's going to be the son of the promise, is God going to resurrect him? Is that what's going to happen? But he's willing to do it nonetheless. God will provide in verse 8. Of course, we have Jesus, the perfect sacrifice. God provided Jesus, the only way of salvation. The only way. So they bound him, the son, to the altar as Jesus is nailed to the cross. Isaac is bound to the altar. And then we find God stopping it. He says, stop! Stop! Now I know that you really do trust me. He's learned his lesson, you see, to trust and obey God in all that he did. And what happens? He says, look, there's a ram caught in a thicket. And the ram is caught with thorns in a thicket bush. And Jesus wears the crown of thorns on his head as he goes up to be the sacrifice. Wow. You couldn't write this stuff, could you? You know, if you were writing a book about this and you wanted to make a storyline that fitted with what was going to happen in the future, and all of a sudden you're trying to write it and you won't get all the details right, but here we have all the details of Jesus being the sacrifice in this story that was written so many years earlier. A ram caught in a thicket, stuck with its head stuck into a bush of thorns. And Jesus goes to the cross carrying a crown of thorns on his head. Then after all that's gone on, Abraham calls this place, God will provide. Was not God did provide, but God will provide. He's looking forward in the text, looking forward through history. He doesn't know about Jesus, no idea. But prophetically he says God will provide, not God did provide. Genesis 22 verse 14, so Abraham called the name of the place, the Lord will provide. And it said, to this day on the mountain of the Lord it shall be provided. Looking forward to that moment when Jesus was going to come and pay the price of my sin and your sin so that we could be totally and utterly forgiven. And if you've any doubt about whether that is true, you've got to see that this was always God's plan, because here in the beginning of the book, just a few pages in, we have this amazing sense, this picture of what God was wanting to do. So we can trust him with our sin. We can trust that God will forgive us and give us that brand new start, that new start that he's promised. And finally, this morning, and I have had to double check this several times, because stuff like this at times really just blows me away. Really, I just go, really? How come I didn't know that? What's going on? Wow, God, you're just amazing. Where is Mount Moriah?
Yes, this is it.
Mount Moriah is the very place that King David bought the threshing floor of Onan to be the site of the temple. It's on the Temple Mount of today where Abraham offers Isaac to be the sacrifice. The very same place, the very same mountain. It's where the Temple of Solomon was built. And when Jesus is sent off to be executed, he is tried within the temple grounds, and he's taken outside, just outside the city walls, to a place of the skull where he's put on a cross and he's nailed there for your sin and my sin. The very same spot that Abraham takes Isaac to offer him as a sin offering, to offer him because God had called him to do. Trust and obey. What's God calling you to do? What has he said into your life? Are you obeying or not? If you read the book, Vice Cop to Vicar, I tell a story in there of how God at times has challenged me about trusting him with everything that I have, everything that I've got, everything that I will have, and some of the lessons that I had to learn growing up as a young Christian. And in the book I talk about a situation where I bought myself a really fancy sports car. I'd always wanted a sports car. I never could afford them. I drove around larders and Skodas, yes, okay, thank you for reminding me of that one. Sorry, your daughter got the better. There's nothing wrong with that Skoda. It went for miles. Yeah, I know. And anyway, I bought when the Lada finally went. I bought this absolutely beautiful. It was gold, and it was a sports car, and it had pop-up headlights. When you turned on the ignition, it went. Oh, it was lovely. Toyota Celica. It wasn't a new car by any means, but it was my pride and joy. And Mark Simons was the vicar here in Driffield, and he was a good friend of mine. And he was going on sabbatical to Scotland, and I felt God say to me, Derrick, why don't you give him one of your cars? He's married, and he had at least one son, maybe more, I'm not sure. And his wife's going to need the car whilst he goes on his sabbatical, and he wants to go to Scotland. So you've got 2 cars. You could give him one of your cars. So yeah, all right, I'll give him one of the cars. And I looked at the Lada, and God said no. Okay, all right. Yes, all right. Thank you. Yes, okay. I get the message. Yeah. So I went to see Mark and told him, would you like one of my cars? You can take it to Scotland. Yeah. He said, oh, fabulous. So I literally, this true story, as I put the keys into Mark's hand for my Toyota Celica gold, beautiful pride and joy car that I really loved. And it was just, oh man, it was so good. And as I put the keys into his hand, God said to me, it's clear as day, that's the last time you'll see that. I wish I'd been faster at getting the keys back. Well, no, I don't actually, but true story. Off he went on his sabbatical. He rang me up less than 2 weeks later, distraught. He'd been driving around Scotland, and a lady doctor had fallen asleep at the wheel of her car coming the other way, across the road, straight into the front of my nice, gorgeous, fabulous Toyota Celica motor car, and written it off completely. The wheel had come off, and there was I saw pictures of it afterwards. How he walked away from that, to this day, I do not know, but he did. He walked away from that, and I got to be honest. It was a lesson that God had to teach me. You do not own anything. It's only on loan, Derrick. Whether it's a Toyota Celica motor car, or whether it's your house, or whatever it is, it's not yours. It's on loan to you, Derrick, because God has been gracious enough to allow you to have these fabulous things. I could be living in a mud hut in Africa. I could be making my food over an open fire and starving. But I'm gracious, God's been gracious enough to let me live in this country and provide me with everything that He's provided for me. I can't call anything my own. I need to remember that. It's all His, for His glory, and has to be used for Him. And over the years, we've done all sorts, and I don't sound like it yet. I've just had to learn that there are times when you just got to give stuff away. I've given away guitars and cameras and all sorts of things because I really wanted to bless other people with stuff. Even gave it away in the car, didn't I? Yes, Godfrey knows that. We've got to learn to trust God with everything we've got. We can't call it our own. We've got to trust Him. And what's He calling you to be obedient with? Is it your job? Is it your finances? Is it the house that you live in? Has God called you, like He did to Kim, to go to Africa? And how, as He did with others, to go and to go into the mission field? Keith, to go to Africa, give up everything, go to these places where they'll risk their lives for the sake of the gospel. What is God calling you to do? And if He's calling you to do it, are you saying yes? Because that's the whole point of this story. Yes, it's great to see the shadows of the cross over this story, But the whole point of this story is for us to realize we need to be like Abraham, that learn the lessons that God is teaching us. You see, God's not interested in the destination that he takes us to. He's interested in what we'll learn on that journey. Multiple times over my life, I've sensed or felt God say to me, I want you to do this, Derrick. I want you to go there and do this, be part of that. And I've started that journey. But never actually got there, because it was the journey that I was meant to go on, because on that journey, God had something to teach me. Abraham had to learn, and he had to learn time and time and time again, because he didn't get it right. And I've had to learn time and time and time again that I need to totally and utterly trust Jesus. And it's a journey I'm still on. I don't always get it right. But it's one I, even today, I'm having to learn to trust God. Do I trust God with my health? Do I trust God with the health of my wife? Do I trust God with the call of God on my life, what he's calling me to do? Do I trust him? And am I obedient to that call? What has God been calling you to do? Time to examine yourself. Time to have a look back through what God has said over the years and see, is there something that he's been trying to show you time and time again, and every time you've still failed at it? Maybe it's time to take note of it, like Abraham finally does, and realize, yes, I will trust God with this. I will trust him with it. I will trust him with my wife. I will trust him with my future. I will trust him with my health. I will trust him that he's got the very best in mind for me. Because I need to stop doing it my way and start doing it God's way. Let's pray.